This happened about 4 years ago, when I was 12 years old. And it's the reason I never went to another sleepover again. Back then, I was obsessed with sleepovers. Not in a normal way either. I absolutely loved them, planning them, hosting them, staying up all night watching movies and eating junk food. My friends always joked that I treated sleepovers like full events. And honestly, they weren't wrong. That night, I was staying at one of my friends' houses. There were 4 of us total. We had blankets spread across the living room floor, snacks everywhere, one dim lamp glowing in the corner of the room. Her parents had already gone upstairs for the night, and we were trying to stay quiet so we wouldn't wake them. At some point, probably around midnight, I realized I needed to use the bathroom, so I got up and quietly walked down the hallway. The house felt completely different away from the living room, that faded behind me, and suddenly everything was just silent. I remember hearing the wooden floor creak under my feet as I walked, that kind of silence where every tiny sound suddenly feels too loud. The bathroom was near the kitchen, and as I walked closer, something immediately felt wrong. At the far end of the kitchen, the back door was slightly open, not wide open, just cracked enough to notice. I stopped walking instantly. At first, I told myself maybe someone forgot to shut it all the way. Maybe one of the parents let the dog out earlier, something normal. But then I noticed the kitchen window above the sink. The screen had been pushed outward slightly from the bottom, and that's when my stomach dropped. I remember gripping the hallway wall without even realizing I was doing it. Something inside me immediately knew someone had come through that window. The kitchen was almost completely dark. The only light came from the hallway behind me. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my phone trying to turn the flashlight on. I slowly pointed the light toward the kitchen. At first, I didn't see anything. Then the beam moved toward the corner beside the refrigerator, and I saw him. A man standing completely still between the fridge and the wall, pressed tightly into the corner like he was trying to hide himself inside the darkness. He was wearing dark clothes, gloves, and for one split second, the flashlight reflected directly off his eyes. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't speak. He just stared directly at me. I remember my entire body freezing instantly. It felt like my brain completely shut down. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't even process what I was looking at. Then suddenly, I screamed. The loudest scream I've ever made in my life. And the second I screamed, everything exploded into chaos. My friends in the living room started screaming too. I heard blankets and snacks getting thrown everywhere. The man suddenly lunged toward the back door, trying to escape. But as he ran across the kitchen, he slipped on the tile floor near the sink. And that single moment probably saved us, because right then, my friend's dad came charging downstairs. I still remember hearing his footsteps pounding down the hallway. He tackled the man into the kitchen cabinets so hard that dishes came crashing onto the floor. Glass shattered everywhere. The guy started fighting back immediately, thrashing, trying to get loose. But her dad pinned him down while screaming for her mom to call the police. Meanwhile, I was just frozen on the floor. I couldn't stop staring at the corner where the man had been standing, because all I could think about was this. If I hadn't gotten up to use the bathroom, he would have still been hiding there, in the dark, just waiting. The police arrived only a few minutes later. They arrested him right there in the kitchen. Apparently, he had been walking through neighborhoods at night, checking doors and windows, and according to the officers, he chose that house because he saw the lights on and realized kids were still awake inside. That thought honestly terrified me more than seeing him, because it meant he chose the house on purpose. I barely remember going home afterward. I was completely numb. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep without lights on. I checked every door multiple times before bed, every window, every lock, and even now, years later, I can still clearly picture him standing there, pressed silently into that corner beside the refrigerator, watching me from the dark. And after that night, I made myself a promise. I would never go to another sleepover again. This happened over 10 years ago, on the night of my 14th birthday sleepover. And honestly, none of us ever forgot it. At the time, my parents had this detached garage on our property that they had partially renovated. It wasn't fully finished, but it had walls, electricity, a small bathroom, and enough space for us to hang out in. The only creepy part was the actual garage door. It still had the old metal roller door that never fully sealed shut, and there were no curtains on the windows. At the time, none of us thought much about that. Our house was out in the countryside, not completely isolated, but far enough away that the nearest neighbor was almost 2 kilometers down the road. Back then, people in our area barely even locked their doors. Nothing bad ever happened there, at least not before that night. For my birthday, my parents finally agreed to let me and my friends sleep overnight in the garage. I had begged for weeks. To us, it felt grown up, independent. There were 5 of us total. And after an entire day full of junk food, movies, and completely overstimulating ourselves on sugar, my parents finally told us to settle down around 11 p.m. Before they went back into the house, my dad specifically reminded me to lock the roller door from the inside, which I did. I remember checking it carefully. Then we turned the lights off. But obviously, none of us were actually tired. So instead of sleeping, we decided to play hide and seek in the dark, which, looking back now, was probably the worst possible idea. The garage was pitch black once the lights were off. The only light came through the uncovered windows from outside. And because the moon was bright that night, you could still vaguely see shapes and movement. By the 3rd round of the game, my best friend was it. I found a hiding spot beside the roller door. There was a cabinet there, and I squeezed myself halfway between it and the wall. At first, everything felt normal. People whispering, trying not to laugh, footsteps moving around in the dark. Then, I heard giggling directly behind me. I froze instantly. At first I thought maybe the sound echoed somehow, because there was physically no space for someone to be behind me. My back was literally against the wall. Then someone else got caught. More laughter. And again, I heard giggling directly behind me. This time, I knew it wasn't one of my friends. I remember this horrible cold feeling washing over me. But instead of saying anything, I quietly moved to another hiding spot near one of the windows. From there, I could barely see outside, mostly just shadows. I was crouched down trying to stay hidden when suddenly, a shadow passed across the window, then stopped. At first, I thought it was my dad checking on us, or maybe one of my older brothers trying to scare us for staying awake, so I stayed quiet. Then my best friend accidentally ran straight into me while searching the room. She started, but I immediately shushed her. I whispered, "My dad's outside." We quickly gathered everyone and climbed back into our sleeping bags, pretending we'd been asleep the whole time. But something felt wrong, because whoever was outside never said anything. I turned slightly toward the window again, and the shadow was still there, not moving, just standing outside the garage watching us. That's when the scratching started. Slow scratching against the garage door. This time all of us heard it, and immediately the entire mood changed. Nobody was laughing anymore. We all sat there completely frozen in silence, hoping whoever it was would just leave. Then came the knocking, soft at first, then louder, and mixed in with it, giggling, low, quiet, almost playful. I still remember how disturbing that giggling sounded, because it didn't sound drunk or childish. It sounded like someone enjoying scaring us. At that point, we were terrified, but, weirdly, none of us screamed yet. I had gotten a cell phone for my birthday that day, but of course, it was still charging inside the house with the rest of my presents, so we had no way to quietly call my parents. Instead, we yelled through the door telling whoever it was to go away. That only made the giggling worse. Then suddenly, something slammed against the windows. We all screamed and looked over, and through the moonlight, we could clearly see the outline of someone standing outside. Big enough to be an adult man. One of the girls dragged a mattress in front of the window, so whoever it was couldn't see inside anymore. Then the person moved to another window. At that point, we all ran into the tiny bathroom connected to the garage, crowding together inside while trying not to cry. I left the bathroom door cracked open slightly so I could still see into the garage. And then, the garage door started shaking violently, not knocking anymore, banging, rattling, like someone was trying to force it open from outside, and through all of it, that giggling never stopped. That was the moment I completely broke. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life. Immediately, all the other girls started screaming too. Then suddenly, everything outside went silent. A few seconds later, we saw lights turn on at the house, and heard my dad sprinting across the property toward us. At almost the exact same moment, a car engine started nearby. We heard tires spinning on gravel before the vehicle sped away down the road. My dad unlocked the garage door and found 5 hysterical girls inside. None of us slept out there that night. My parents brought us back into the house and let all of us sleep together in their room because we were too terrified to be alone. And honestly, for years afterward, I couldn't sleep in that garage again. Even now, the thing that still creeps me out the most was the giggling. Because whoever that person was, they weren't trying to rob us. They were enjoying it. This happened when I was around 7 or 8 years old. And even now, almost 10 years later, me and my best friend still refuse to talk about it. At the time, we lived in Florida, about 15 minutes outside of Tampa. My friend practically lived at my house back then. We had sleepovers constantly, almost every weekend. and that night started exactly like all the others. We spent hours playing with Barbies, watching movies, reading random books way later than we were supposed to. Eventually, sometime around 9 or 10 p.m., we finally decided to go to sleep. I had a bunk bed in my room, and that night, both of us were sleeping on the top bunk, mostly because we thought it was more fun. I remember climbing up the ladder and immediately noticing something felt wrong. Not scary yet, just off. The house we lived in was pretty old, and our landlord never fixed anything. The air conditioning constantly broke, the power would randomly cut out, stuff like that. Before bed, I specifically remember turning my fan on and asking my mom to lower the AC because it was hot upstairs. But once we got into bed, everything was off. The fan had stopped. The AC was dead silent. At first, I just assumed the power had gone out again, so I didn't think much of it. But after about 20 minutes, neither of us could sleep. The room felt unbelievably hot, like the air itself had stopped moving. I remember whispering my friend's name quietly to see if she was still awake. She answered immediately. And before I could even say anything else, she whispered, "I can't sleep." Then after a pause, she added, "But it's not because it's hot." I remember slowly turning toward her silhouette in the dark, then looking up at the ceiling and quietly asking, "What do you mean?" There was this long silence before she answered. Then she whispered, "It's the man in the corner." The second she said that, I felt this wave of chills go through my entire body. I turned my head slowly toward the corner of the room. At first, I didn't see anything, and honestly, I almost felt relieved. I thought maybe she was trying to scare me. Then I adjusted my blanket slightly, and that tiny movement changed the angle of my vision just enough to see him, a figure standing in the corner of the room. Tall, completely dark, just standing there watching us. I remember instantly grabbing my friend's hand. Neither of us screamed, neither of us moved. We just stared at him, frozen. I whispered, "We need to get my mom." And I felt my friend nod beside me, but neither of us could actually move. It felt like every part of my body had locked up. Then suddenly, I felt movement on the bed. Very slow movement. At first I thought maybe one of us had shifted accidentally, but then the mattress dipped again, closer this time, and I realized someone was climbing the ladder. The blanket slowly shifted as weight pressed onto the bed. I forced myself to open my eyes wider and saw the figure crawling toward us. Slowly, I still couldn't see a face, only the outline, but I remember hearing breathing, heavy breathing. My friend was completely frozen beside me. I could feel how hard she was shaking through her hand. The figure kept moving closer, closer, and I remember this horrible feeling washing over me, like death itself was crawling toward us. I could barely breathe. Then finally, I leaned toward my friend and whispered, "Scream when I squeeze your hand." She nodded once, very slowly. The figure reached forward, and right as I saw its hand start moving toward my face, I squeezed her hand, and both of us screamed as loud as we could. Instantly, we heard my mom running down the hallway. The bedroom door flew open, and the light snapped on. Me and my friend were hysterically crying, holding onto each other so tightly it hurt. But the corner of the room was empty. The ladder was empty. There was no one there. My mom searched the entire house, checked every room, every closet, every window. All the doors were still locked. Nothing had been opened. Nothing had been touched. That night, me and my friend refused to go back into my room, so my mom let us sleep on the couch downstairs. We stayed awake most of the night watching Barbie movies with every light in the living room turned on. And even now, after all these years, I still remember exactly how it felt seeing that figure crawl onto the bed, not walking, not rushing, just slowly moving closer to us in the dark. And to this day, I still don't know what we saw that night, but whatever it was, it felt evil.